available. Okay, so we're delighted to welcome Rabbi Michael Laitner to us again, all the way from Holy Bagel in the old city of Jerusalem. And over to you. Do you need to screen share, or are you?
Yes, if I could screen share something, that would be.
Okay, I will do that now. You should be able to do that now, hopefully.
Great. Okay. So yeah, I'll do it in a couple of minutes' time. We'll see if it works. Thank you, Stephen. Okay. So first of all, thank you, Rabbi Lister. Thank you, Stephen, for the opportunity to be online with you again. And it's great that this program takes place. Been going, it seems, at least to me, for ages now. So big yashar koach to everybody. And I said thank you for the opportunity to be with you once again, which is a great way to start a Tuesday morning. Actually, I can't say it starts a Tuesday morning, but I just had my first cup of coffee this morning, so I feel like it's starting the morning now. And I just want to wish you well, and please God, things should continue to flourish in Edgeware. Now, I'd like to look at a topic today, which perhaps is closer to home than we might imagine. If I was to say to you, and of course no one has to answer, especially as we're on Zoom, but I was to say to you, what I think is a fundamental question, which certainly is in my thinking several times a week, but one which I think is an important one for the Jewish people. And it's this: why do we have a shul? Now, on the face of it, you might look at it and say, well, of course we have a shul. We've always had a shul, or nearly always had a shul. And wherever Jews go, there's a shul, you know, and there are all kinds of shul jokes. There wouldn't be shul jokes if there weren't shul, so you have to have shul. Okay, but why have a shul? And I only ask the question half in jest, because there are, I think, some very important ramifications, both in terms of halacha, but in terms of understanding how to become better Jews, if I can put it that way, that emerge from this question. So let me give you one kind of brief rabbit hole rather. We won't go down very far, but just a little bit, just to kind of introduce the topic. Imagine that we were playing Dragon's Den, or we were in The Apprentice. You know, we were raising money for Chigwell Shul. That's the new Apprentice, I think. Fantastic, unbelievable what they've done there. If you haven't seen the video, it's just absolutely brilliant. And thank God it's been a very successful campaign. Alan Sugar bringing The Apprentice to Chigwell Shul. You can find it on the Chigwell Shul YouTube site. But if I was to say to you, we have got, let's say, £100,000, and we need to have a mikveh, and we need to have a Sefer Torah, and we need to have a shul, and we need to have a place for kosher food, and we need to have a school, but I've only got £100,000 to spend, and I'm not going to get all of those with £100,000. How do I prioritize? What do I do? And whereas instinctively, at least the way that I've grown up, the answer is, well, you have a shul. You think when communities gather together, they generally build a shul. Not so clear necessarily from the halacha, the Shulchan Aruch, if that's what the priority should be. It depends on the context and whether there's somewhere else for people to pray without there specifically being a shul. But there are competing priorities, as in so many other areas of life. So when answering the question, why do we have a shul? That's one little rabbit hole to go down, which we're not going to go any further down, but I just mentioned it to set the scene. The second, though, is when we actually have a shul, why do we have a shul? And if you even travel around London and see different kinds of shuls, let alone further afield, of course, you will see it in your own experiences, I'm sure, in places that you've lived in or visited. You'll see all different kinds of shuls with all different kinds of purposes. Some of them will make sure they've got a hall and they've got classrooms. Others will just have a place to pray. And they might have a bet midrash. Others will have a very small place to pray and an enormous social area. I remember there's one shul I went to in America. I won't say where it was, but I remember walking in, and before I got there, Rabbi Roselaw had said to me jokingly, he said, the entrance hall, he said, is the size of Belmont Shul. So I laughed, I walked in. My only comment to Rabbi Roselaw was, you underestimated it. It's much bigger than Belmont Shul. This is the entrance hall of this shul. Now, I don't know what it cost, but evidently, in terms of the priorities, they wanted, the builders of the shul wanted, when people walked in, and they got me, they went, wow, this is bigger than Belmont Shul. I can't believe it. So every shul has its own kind of priorities and what it wants to make. So the question of why do we have a shul, I think, is a very important one. And in terms of building a community, why do we have a shul, is also a very important one, because there are different people with different interests and different agendas and whatever else that they might have. And binding them together, as you know, is not always a simple matter. with this introduction, I want to examine from the beginning of our parasha some ideas which I think are not only important, but are significant in every generation, not just important in and of themselves. And they relate not to the question specifically of why to build the shul, but why to build a mishkan, why the Jews in the desert built the portable temple. The earliest kind of, the way I think of it is, if you'll forgive me, when I was a kid, one of my favorite TV programs was the A-Team. So if any of you remember, kids or whatever else, watching the A-Team. But one of the bits of the A-Team was that wherever they were in America, or wherever they were in the world, they managed to find raw materials in the case of about 4 minutes during each episode to build the most incredible machine that was just what they needed so that it could get them out of trouble and rescue the people they needed to rescue. So the Mishkan always reminds me a little bit of the A-Team, that Bnei Israel are in the desert. The desert's not the best place to construct things, the easiest place to find materials. Okay, they had materials with them, but still, somehow miraculously, they managed to construct this edifice, which was easy to put up, was easy to put down. They carry it around with them, and presumably it was only meant to be used for a very short amount of time. And that's the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And why for a short amount of time? Well, think about if Jewish history went differently. Fast forwards to the parasha of Shelach Lecha and the sin of the spies or the scouts. So if that had not happened, then presumably the Jews would have gone straight to Israel instead of enduring another 38 years wandering around in the desert. So if that's the case, they've gone straight to Israel. Let's imagine they built the temple pretty soon afterwards. Even if they managed to get to Israel and do what they needed to do there, it might not have taken as long as it took Joshua and the others. The Jews could have built a temple pretty soon after they'd left Egypt, in which case this Mishkan would have been perhaps even less used than some of the outdoor marquees in Hendon and maybe in Edgware as well, and East Golders Green that people have been using for the last couple of years. Okay, like the Mishkan might have had even shorter career than some of those if everything had gone to plan. We don't know, one of the great unknowns of Jewish history. So the question I think returns, why so much detail, which the Torah of course gives us about building the Mishkan, but why build it at all? Why was there a need for such a short time and in the desert to have the Mishkan? Of course, ultimately the Mishkan lasted for the 40 years in the desert, and it found its final, as far as we know, its final location at Shiloh in the northeast of Jerusalem. But no, that probably wasn't in the contemplation of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was in God's contemplation, but not in the contemplation of Moshe Rabbeinu at the time. So I want to look at these questions and see what lessons we can learn from them. And in doing so, I want to look particularly at the comments of one of my favorite biblical commentators, the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, who lived from 1194 to 1270, approximately, and was particularly famous for his commentary on the Torah, his commentary on the Talmud as well. He was also a doctor, as of course many great rabbis of his time were. These great rulers of Jewish life, the medieval Rishonim, Rashi, Ramban. Rashi wasn't the doctor, because Ramban, Maimonides, and Ramban, Nachmanides were. And he was also a great polemicist. He famously, of course, represented the Jewish people at the disputation in Barcelona in 1263. Of course, when I think Barcelona, of course, growing up where I just think football. But of course, for Jews, Barcelona is much more important than just thinking football. And the Ramban in 1263 in Barcelona, despite having the odds very heavily stacked against him, succeeded in defending the honor of the Jewish people, the honor of God, the honor of the Torah in the debates in Barcelona. And of course, what was his rewards for having won that debate against the apostate Jew? He was allowed to leave with his life intact, which, on the face of it, it's a pretty good reward to have. I mean, if you don't have that, then I guess other rewards don't really count for very much. He made his way to the land of Israel. In the last years of his life, he wrote his commentary on the Torah. And of course, the Ramban shul in the old city of Jerusalem, it's said, is based at least on a shul that he founded when he went to, or at least prayed in when he went to Jerusalem. So I'm going to try and share this screen. Now let's see, Stephen, if it works, and we'll see how the Ramban will help us. Just a moment. Let's try this. Oh, fantastic. I love it when a plan comes together. Okay. Let me just go to the top. Now, the Ramban does a couple of interesting, I think, unusual things here. And I'm not going to read all of this text, don't worry. I'm just going to read some of it. In fact, let me just see if I can put light on the in, which will help. Good. Okay, that'll help us. Okay. Now the Ramban, in introducing his commentary on this week's parasha, this is the beginning of this week's parasha, does something unusual. He gives an introduction to what he's about to say. Even though he provided introductions to each of the 5 parts of the Chumash, he doesn't normally provide an introduction to the beginning of each week's parasha. And here he provides us with, I think, an important introduction. And what he does is contextualize it. Imagine that we're all in the shoes of the Jews. I don't like that just for alliteration, but I think it's important to think about the things as they were for the people who were there at the time. We're standing at Mount Sinai. A few weeks before, we were still in Egypt. Okay? We're at Mount Sinai. There's been a revelation from God. It was awesome in every sense of the word. Okay? Then after that, we get various laws that we read about last Shabbat in Mishpatim. What are we going to do now? We're in the desert. There's no Starbucks, let alone Pizaza. Okay? We're in the desert. Now, what are we going to do? How are we going to move forward? So the Ramban addresses this, and he says at line 1, and I'll paraphrase the English at the moment, and I'll read some of the text later on in Hebrew. Just as God had spoken with the Jewish people face to face, as it were, telling them the Aseret HaDibrot, the revelation at Sinai, and had commanded them through Moses, some of the mitzvot, which the Ramban likens in line 2 to what he calls Avot leMitzvoteha shel Torah. Let's call them the headline and the main kind of category mitzvot of the Torah. A number of rabbinic commentators say that you can take the 10 commandments, for instance, and underneath each one of the 10 of them, you can categorize all the other 603 mitzvot of the Torah. That's, of course, if you say there are only 10 commandments in the 10 commandments, but that's a topic for another time. If I'd come last week, maybe we would have looked at that, but never mind. Might be there more than 10 commandments. Imagine what happens to all the shul jokes then if there are more than 10 commandments. So it ruins all of them. But anyway, that's fortunately not my issue now. And the Ramban continues in line 2. And he said, this is also what rabbis do when they are teaching converts who come to become Jewish. They will learn, at least initially, kind of the headline mitzvot. And then line 3, second word, Yisrael kibulu aleihem la'asot kol ma sheyitzavem al yedei Moshe, al yedo shel Moshe. And the Jewish people accepted everything that was commanded to them through Moses. So Ramban's setting the scene. We've accepted a task and we are ready. The question is, ready to do what? So the Ramban continues, God made a covenant with us, Karati Mahem Berit, on all of this, and gave us various conditions. These are at lines 4 and 5. So let's skip down to the middle of line 6. So the Ramban says, now we've got this, and I've given you the proofs for it. I've told you the situation. I've brought verses from the Torah to prove it. What do we do now? He then says, and now they are sanctified people because of what's happened. It's appropriate. It's the right thing that there should be some form of sanctuary for God's presence to, I'll add in the word perhaps palpably or more palpably, dwell amongst them. Now let's pause for a moment. We asked before, why would there be a shul? Why would there be a mishkan? Okay, particularly given the time frames. It seems, according to the Ramban at least, that it was very important, even at this stage of Jewish history, even if this was only going to be a very, very temporary measure, that there was some kind of building which the Jews felt a greater palpable sense of connection to God's presence. Okay? Which seems to suggest, if you wanted to try and analyze this, that the reason for the Mishkan is that Jews need a place. They need a central place to focus on. You can't be a Jew just kind of sitting in your home, or you're not going to succeed as much as a Jew just sitting in your home doing whatever you're doing, even if you're doing all of the mitzvot that you can do. Okay? Even if you've got Zooms everywhere and all day, you can't do it and without some kind of central place that you know is functioning and you somehow feel a connection to. And I think this is very important because it begins to answer a question as to why we have a shul. Okay? That we need to somehow feel connection to God through a building. Now, you could also challenge this and say, hold on, the Torah told us not long beforehand that you shouldn't be making any idols, shouldn't be making a representation of things. Does this idea seem a little bit too uncomfortably close to what we read about with the idols? Okay? And of course, there are other commentaries, Rashi, for instance, who use the Ramban, use the Mishkan in a very different way, that it's actually much more connected to repairing things after the sin of the golden calf. But for the Ramban, who likes to read the Torah in a linear fashion rather than reading it like a novel, if you read the Torah like a novel, by the end of chapter 1, you're up to a certain stage. Beginning of chapter 2, you've got to catch up, or you've got to get ahead, and then you'll catch up from chapter 1. You've all read novels, you know how they read. But for the Ramban, no, this is a linear presentation. And once the Jews got the Torah, got this special status, that they have the special relationship with God, they need a place where things are going to look and feel palpably connected to God. So that's our first answer. And he then, in line 7, begins to substantiate it. He says, and therefore, al devar hamishkan, the first thing that was commanded after all of these laws, the first project, if I can put it that way, was the Mishkan. Again, towards the end of line 7, that there should be a house in their midst which was sanctified for his name. That's what the Ramban says. And there God would speak to Moses, and he would command the Jewish people the rest of the Torah that he was teaching them. Good. The Ramban then is going to anticipate a question which we will look at very shortly. He says towards the end of line 8, what is going to be the central part of this building? Is it going to be the foyer that's going to be as big as Belmont Shul? Will it be the Shul sanctuary? Will it be the hall where everyone can play football in? Just reflecting on my use of Shul halls over the years, not just for playing football, but probably more than it should have been. Okay, will it be rooms for people to meet in and have activities? No, says the Ramban. He says, towards the end of line 8, the Mishkan, the main reason that God wanted us to have a Mishkan, was that the Aron, the Ark, which of course had the Luchotim, the tablets, and would ultimately have Sifrei Torah in it, that is the central place where God's presence would be most palpable. Now, the Ramban's introduction, I think, is very important here, because he's setting out, number one, that we have a Mishkan because we need a place, but also because the center of that place will be the Aron. Okay? If it's going to be a place which is focused purely on spiritual matters. And this helps the Ramban answer a question which arises from the text, which we'll look at in a minute. Before we get to that, in terms of our own day, I just want to introduce something which we'll get to towards the end. We've got a few more minutes still. Which I introduce to you now is how you apply this today. And there's some amazing stories which I heard from Rabbi Sachs, which I think are very pertinent for this. I hope you all got in the post before Rosh Hashanah the copy of the book about Rabbi Sachs's life, Rabbi Sachs and the community we built together. Lovely article from Rabbi Lister in there, and picture from as well when Rabbi Sachs was answering your daughter Shoshana's question. So really, really lovely article. But towards the end of that book, there is an article by some of the administrative team who worked for many years in Rabbi Sachs's office, Louise Gould, Val Sheridan, and various others. And they tell the story, which I'm sure you may have heard, I'm sure Rabbi Lister has also heard, we heard at rabbinic events, of when Rabbi Sachs was flying back, tragically, from Yitzhak Rabin's funeral in 1995. And if you haven't seen the story, I really recommend that you read it. So it'll take 2 or 3 minutes to read. But in essence, what happened in the story is that Rabbi Sachs was on the plane back with Tony Blair, Prince of Wales, Paddy Ashdown, and Malcolm Rifkind. He let the politicians get on with discussing whatever they needed to discuss. Prince Charles went up to the cockpit, certain stage, maybe wanted to fly the plane, who knows? I guess if you're the heir to the throne and you say, I want to fly the plane, a bit difficult for the pilot to say no, but anyway. So, and Rabbi Sachs sat down in another part of the plane and opened his Chumash and started learning the parasha. You know, that's what a Jew does. It was already Monday, you know, so he needed to get going for next week's parasha, so he was learning it. At a certain stage, Tony Blair looked across and said, "What are you reading?" So Rabbi Sachs told him, and Tony Blair said, "I've never seen anything like this. This is fascinating." The upshot is you'll see in the story, he ended up giving a shiur to Prince of Wales, Tony Blair, Malcolm Rifkind, and Paddy Ashdown for an hour, like without preparation. Okay, right at the shiur on the Parasha HaShavua. Now, first of all, that's quite incredible. Just stop and think for a second. What would you do if you had that opportunity with those people? You know, that perhaps some of the most influential people in the country, and they are asking you to teach them about and they're all interested in the Bible. Okay, I felt a little bad for Malcolm Rifkind because he's quite a knowledgeable Jew. So I'm sure he kind of was, was, oh my goodness, here I am sitting with these guys, and it's like the rabbi's talking to me. Sure, I can't believe it. But anyway, they learned what they learned. But I think this had a very profound effect, because not only, I think we can suggest it lead into Rabbi Sacks's book in 1997, The Politics of Hope, which has a foreword by Gordon Brown, and wherever one's political affiliations, I think it's probably fair to say that it became a significant influence on New Labour. Reading through that book, and then as we have the advantage of hindsight now, thinking about those years, see there was a significant influence. So the chief rabbi had a significant influence on government policy for 13 years or so. But also, what it meant was that some of these politicians and Prince Charles kind of adopted Rabbi Sacks as their rabbi. So they asked him their shilas, which is a bit like bizarre, right? But it's incredible. What a Kiddush Hashem. So in particular, Rabbi Sacks has a very well-known idea that the Mishkan has 330 or so verses, whereas the creation of the world has about 300 verses. Why 30 verses, 330 against 30. Why have so many more for the creation, for the building of the Mishkan than the creation of the world? I mean, the creation of the world is one bigger thing than creating the building the Mishkan. So he said to us once that a genesis for this idea, not the only one, was a phone call he got from Tony Blair, who said, Tony Blair reads a chapter of the Bible every day. So at that particular point, he was up to our Parshiot, was the end of Shemot. And he called Rabbi Sacks, and with the same question that every Jew, I imagine, has asked their rabbi and themselves when they're sitting in shul: why is it that we read Terum once at Sava, and then a couple of weeks later we're going to read Vayakol Pekudei, and it's all the same? I mean, even Rashi, Vayakol Pekudei, Rashi doesn't overly trouble us, so to speak. On Vayakol Pekudei, it's, if you don't like learning Rashi, it's your favorite centers of the year. So why all this detail? Tony Blair asked Rabbi Sacks, to which Rabbi Sacks replied along the lines of, look, for God to create the world, God does whatever he wants. It's just, that's the way it is. And the messages that we need to learn from that can be taught to us in 30 or 34 verses. The Torah is giving us messages. It's not giving us a history of everything. To bring people together, to build something, to create a community, to build a society, that's much harder, so to speak. That requires 330 verses. It requires everyone's participation. Requires everyone to be a part of it, and somehow it requires shared vision, shared ideas, etc. That, if you want to build a community, how much more so a society, that you need a lot more, and that's why we have 330 so verses. Tony Blair, I mean, you can kind of see from Tony Blair's subsequent writings and speeches and things he said, embraced that idea wholeheartedly and found it very significant. And of course, all this harks back to that chavruta. It wasn't quite a chavruta, that chabura, I'll put it like small shiur, that took place on this plane flying back tragically from Yitzhak Rabin's funeral. Why do I mention that? Not just because it's pertinent to the parasha, but also it helps us, I think, understand, and we'll close with this shortly, another point the Ramban makes, which relates to what we just said. Verse 10 of the beginning of chapter 25, which is this first chapter of Terumah, gives us the first command for what was going to be in the Mishkan, and it's the Aron. And the Torah says, unusually, va'asu Aron atzei shetim. The command is in the plural, va'asu, whereas all the Ramban notes that the other things which were built in the Mishkan are commanded in the singular. So he says at line 16, I'm going to try and be a bit clever here. Hopefully you can see I've highlighted it here with my cursor. Good. It's all of them, chulam b'lashon yachid. All of the other things are in the singular tense. Why? Ki Moshe keneged kol Yisrael. Because Moshe was considered like the rest of Bnei Israel, and he dealt with it on their behalf. Okay? And then the end of line 16, the beginning of line 17, v'yitachein, and it might be, she'yirmoz, that this is a hint, she'yu kol Yisrael mishtatzim ba'asiyat ha'aron, that all of the Jews in some way should be connected to the construction of the Aron, but avushu kadosh mishkanei elyon, because it was the most sacred part of the Mishkan. V'sheyizkeh kulam laTorah. This would help them all merit to have an attachment to the Torah. And the Ramban goes on to say, I'm noticing the clock, so I'll summarize. The Ramban goes on to say that everybody was somehow involved in the construction of the Aron, whether they dedicated something or whether just in terms of their thoughts and their prayers, they were connecting themselves to it. Just like today, we might not be able to physically necessarily connect with people in different places or times, or even help them practically, but we can certainly pray for them. We can certainly feel a sense of kinship with them. And so for the Ramban, the Aron was made first because of this. What's even more significant, I think, is that the Aron, its construction, the Aron, is taught to us before the construction of the Mishkan itself. It's like building an oven before you build a kitchen or building a house on the face of it. But why? Because it's presented here as that central point. This is what you are focused on, and the rest you build around from. Okay, and that's very, very important. I remember actually discussing this with one of your members, David Kaplan, and I worked with him in the US. That he suggested to us once that this is part of the template of what it means to be in a shul. That the Aron is always at the center in this way, and ideologically you are building around the Aron as well. You can hear it much better from him than I would quote it. But your ideology building around the Aron as well. So I think the Ramban begins to answer our original question, which is, why do we have a shul? Well, we know it's a place ultimately where we have to feel this unique nature of being a Jew and closer to God. But of course, in doing that, we also have to think, despite the importance of the Aron, the central importance of the Aron, the fact that everyone needs to be connected to it, everyone needs to feel a part of it, and that the sense of the vision of what is a shul, like what was the Mishkan, was something that had to be this great community binding project that would bind people together in some way. And I'd suggest that that's one of the reasons that shuls have had such a long history, and please God will continue to have a very long future, is because they have the capability to do that, to bring people together and think out the box, as you guys have done by having this, and maintaining it throughout the pandemic, and please God beyond. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we should all be blessed to succeed and have great spiritual satisfaction and success in all of our endeavors. So thank you again, and have a great day and week ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Shkoda.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Laitner. That was very interesting and topical. If anyone has any questions they want to raise or comments they want to make, I'm sure they can be answered now. Otherwise, we'll close. No, all silence. So, okay. All right then. Okay. Thank you very much. Have again Chodesh Tov, everyone. Thank you again, Rabbi Laitner, and have a good day and a good week, everyone. We'll see you all next week. Thank you very much. See, Cyril's clapping there. Cyril's clapping. Yeah. Okay, we'll clap. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.